Hey. Oh,
What's
that's fine. You
up?
want to talk to me? Thank you, Molly. I had to help my
Okay.
mom learn Zoom this morning.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she has a work Zoom meeting.
Hmm.
The poor woman would have gone the whole time not knowing why people couldn't hear her because she wouldn't know how to unmute her microphone.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, she's one of those.
I have grandma wanting me to explain to her how to do it, and I just don't think that's going to go over well at all.
Yeah, and my dad asked me too. He's like, well, what account should I get? I'm like, just get the free one. He's like, oh, well, there's about 6 or 7 different free ones. I'm like, no, there's not. He just gets like if I won't help him like right then and there, like in that exact moment.
Hmm. Crazy stuff. Does anyone else feel like the weeks are going by like super slow? I
I'm
just,
like, it's only Tuesday.
yeah. Maybe it's the days that are going by slow, but then by the time we get to the weekend, it feels fast. I don't know. It's just like
Yeah.
confusing.
Also, I feel like the days have like dragged on because we haven't had nice weather, like at least where I am, except for yesterday and today are like the last days of sunshine, and it's literally supposed to snow like later this week and
Yeah, I saw that.
be like garbage until the end of April. So if you see me sitting outside in class again, don't judge me.
No judgment at all. I wish I could. I feel like if I tried to go somewhere outside, it like fails.
Oh yeah. We just have like a nice like back porch or whatever that I can just chill on.
Yeah, I'm jealous.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. I've got another one of my favorites in the background there, Wizard of Oz. So I hope you all had a nice weekend. And I know you probably can't believe it, but we're in our third week of Zoom classes, which seems really weird to me for some reason. Yeah, and so we just have 3 weeks to go too, right? So this week, next week, and then the final week. So we are killing it, people, right? We're doing it and we're killing it and we're all good. So just a few things to tell you. I did send out the splinting material over the weekend for that final lab project to try to make some simple adaptive equipment out of the splinting material. I just wanted to remind you again, in this state that we are in, nobody in my house has tested positive of COVID. We are not experiencing symptoms. I did wipe everything down with antibacterial wipes using gloves before I put them in the envelopes. You can also, once you receive the envelopes, let the splinting material, because it is plastic, it is a polymer, you can let it sit for up to a week before you open it and use it. That's why I wanted to get it out pretty soon. So you have that time to let it sit before you open it, and then you can use it. So I will be planning on, I'm going to record a video of myself using the splinting material and sort of go through the steps on how to do it. And I should be posting that by the end of this week. And I'll also post like written instructions on Moodle. And I, again, I just want to say, I've never done this before with students doing this at home and right, in this way. And as I said about all the lab sort of projects and things like that, it's really about your experience doing it, right? So it's not about the end product. So don't freak out if it turns out into like a weird blob or something and you can't get it to do what you want it to do. It's again just having the experience of using the splinting material and trying to make something out of it. And yeah, so that will be in our last week during lab. We'll all just sort of hop onto Zoom during lab and show everybody what you were at least trying to make and talking about the features of it and who would use it and what they would use it for. Any questions about that for anybody? Okay, if you don't, for some reason, receive a large envelope in the mail from Nazareth College OT department, just let me know, if you don't receive it by the end of the week. And then I still have some pieces here and some envelopes I can try to mail again. Oh, yep, so final exam. So I am 90% sure that we will have our final exam during the final exam time block that we already had. So that would be April 30th at 8 a.m. And I am about 95% sure at this point. I'm still working on it, but will be a Moodle exam, and we'll all just sort of meet on Zoom and take the exam together. And it should be fairly similar to the exams that you've taken for me in the past, right? A large portion of multiple choice questions with some short answers at the end. But we will talk more specifics about sort of exam review when it gets closer in the last week, but just for your planning. We'll plan on that for April 30th at 8 a.m. Does anybody have any questions or anything that they want me to go over before we get started?
I have a question.
Yep.
So I'm looking at the inclusivity assignment and I'm not sure where I'm supposed to go to be able to like input the information.
You mean for the assessment?
Yeah, like so Molly sent me the address and I like looked it up and looked for like the inclusivity assessment tool and then there's no like link or anywhere to like get into it to like be able to input the information online.
So I would say for, let's see, good question. I would say for this project, because it's changed so much, and I don't know what you guys have already been doing, but has anybody else started the inclusivity assessment and been putting information anywhere?
I have started mine, and I logged into my inclusivity account, and then there was like a button that said download assessment forms, and then I converted the PDF, and I've been filling that in.
Okay. So that I think would be what I would prefer everybody to do, because it's not like a typical sort of inclusivity assessment that they would be looking for. So instead of putting it, sort of trying to get it right online, because there is an app that you can do, like you could download the app and do it through the app, but I'd rather you download the paper forms and put the information on the paper forms. If that makes sense to everybody.
Allie, where did you find that?
So if you log into your account, you have to click on, I think it says the recreation database, which takes you into like all the other things people have filled in. And then if you go up to the top and click your name, it will say like download assessment forms. And then it takes you into, I think, like a huge page where all the PDF links are for each one.
Okay, does that sound okay with everybody? Okay, sounds good. I just want to shout out Jenna, love your background. I like seeing Stanley in the back, another one of my favorites, The Office, awesome. Okay, so today does anybody else have any other questions or anything you want me to answer or address? We good? Okay, so we do have an article presentation today. So today we're talking about assistive technology in the schools. So we have, whichever one of you would like to pull up your PowerPoint, and you guys can start.
Oh, okay. I'm trying to share the screen.
Oh,
and it
yeah.
says, yeah.
Sorry. Advanced sharing options. Yes. Okay. Sorry. Yes. Okay, go ahead. Did that work?
Yes. Okay. Did it pop up?
Yep.
Okay.
All right, I just have to move our faces out of the way. Okay, so we did the article on assistive technology, decision-making practices in public schools. So the problem that the authors talked about in general was just mainly about deciding on assistive technology. And this was in the state of Texas. So choosing the best assistive technology devices and software presents with like an extremely difficult problem. The IDA provides little guidance, like not a whole lot of policy information or procedure or implementation. And there's 20,000 different assistive technology devices, which just add to the confusion and difficulty, because how do you know that you're choosing the right one when there's that many? In the decision for deciding like what assistive technology is best is made by the IEP team, the individual education plan team. And there's typically a lot of confusion or uncertainty over which professional should be on the team. And then also too, there could also be like a lack of expertise like within those professionals themselves. So the consideration step is typically okay. So like decide if a child needs an assistive technology or software, but picking the right device and implementing it, meaning like teaching them how to use it, like using it in school is like where the bigger problem is. And the purpose was just to kind of evaluate district level decision making for assistive technology across the state of Texas. And so for a question for you guys, as a future OT, do you think you might experience difficulty when trying to choose an assistive technology device for a client? And this could be for a client of any age, because obviously this study is like specific to just children in elementary school. But thinking of clients like across the whole lifespan, do you think that it would be easy or hard to choose the right assistive technology? And you guys can chat or unmute. Jenna said, for sure, but we've learned that it is a trial and error process and takes time, for sure. And Kristen said, yes, for sure. I can't believe the article was saying how there's 20,000 different ones to choose from. Like, that's crazy. Yeah, so it would be difficult. So there were kind of 3 research questions that they wanted to answer within this study. So the first question is, who are the professionals that are on the team that selects and implements the AT devices and software for students, specifically in math, reading, and communication? And communication covers written and spoken like language. Question 2, what are the factors that influence the decisions to purchase or implement the assistive technology devices, which is like really important to answer, and how those factors might predict the number of math, reading, and communication devices or software that a school district reports. So they're kind of just trying to get like a big picture of this whole assistive technology device thing. So participants and inclusion criteria. So the participants were special education directors across the state of Texas, and they used this like website database called Texas Education Agency, and they gathered like 661 email addresses and reached out to like all these people. Obviously they couldn't reach all of them because whatever, their email didn't work or their inbox was full, whatever. And then as far as responses go, they got 163 responses. So obviously all of those who responded clarified that they were special education directors, which then fit the criteria to be in this study. An interesting like little fact is that 21% were special education directors, and they also held another position such as being a teacher or another administrative role. And I know like in my mom's school district, that's like the same thing with some of them. And they obviously still included those responses. And then as far as like the location of special education directors go, 48% were from like a rural zip code, 22 were from a suburban, and 28 were from urban. And in the bottom right, I just kind of like outlined the picture that they included in the article.
Okay, so the procedures and data, like Christy mentioned, it was a survey. They reached out to the special education directors in the public school districts of Texas, aimed at answering those 3 research questions that were mentioned before, which included the determining which people were selected or were responsible for picking out the different AT devices, what factors went into that decision-making process, and how those factors associated with picking out the devices would predict how many the school would report. So they used the Texas Education Agency to gather those emails, which was the 661 of the special education directors in Texas. While only 661 emails were found, or while there was that many found, only 163 responded initially or after the initial like gathering. And like she said, based on these statistics, a lot of them were from mainly rural and low socioeconomic statuses. Whether that is related, it's unknown, but that was just some of the percentages that were taken from the people that responded. And the overall response rate was 29%, so it's not overly high, but for the purpose of their study, it seemed to fit what they were looking for. And they also used other resources to measure how many of those 20,000 devices were helpful for just math, reading, and communication, using places like other literature, AbleNet, which is a website, and other vendor websites for the AT devices associated with this. And they also mentioned that they chose math, reading, and communication because of where this is an elementary school. Those 3 subjects are some of the main ones that will definitely transfer to secondary schooling and so on, and compared to the smaller topics that may or may not be continued as they get older. And for their analysis, to answer their first and second research questions, they used frequency distributions, which used percentages, which is something else that is found on the research article. And also to answer their third research question, they used multiple regression techniques, which is basically just, it's something used in statistics that looks at the set variables, which would be research questions 1 and 2, in order to predict the third variable, or the dependent variable, in this case, the research question 3. So the collinearities or correlations that they found, they use scatter plots and tables to look at, which is something Maggie will get into. But they liked using the tables, scatter plots, and percentages in order to get an overall area of just the type of people helping and how those people helped influenced how many AT devices would be reported in the school overall. So the next question would be, based off the people evaluated in this study, which fields in the school district do you think are the most responsible for choosing the devices? So basically, which professions that are usually located in public schools, like speech, OT, PT, the like, which do you think would be ranked the highest as making those assistive technology device decisions?
And you guys can chat too. I have the chat box open so I can read those.
Yeah.
It's okay to guess. We'll tell you in a second.
Yeah.
Oh, please. Yes. Good job, Jeannie.
That's a good guess.
Yes, speech is actually a big one. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Everybody. Like 3 other people said speech.
Cool.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so then after the data was collected, there was 4 main results that were found. And they found that an average of 4.46 individuals were responsible for the purchasing of the assistive technology devices. And then number 2 answers your question from before. Speech language pathologists were considered the most responsible. And then that's followed by OTs and then other school professionals. And then number 3 is that user friendliness was the most common factor associated with the decision-making process. And that was followed by experience with the devices, teacher recommendations, and then parent recommendations. And then lastly, they found that schools in rural areas had fewer assistive technology devices compared to schools in suburban or urban areas. And they felt that that was largely affected by the social economic status or the student enrollment size of those schools. And then, so kind of going off that last question, why do you think that the speech language pathologists are most commonly responsible for those device decisions over an OT? And you can unmute, you can chat, whichever is easier for you guys. Any thoughts? Social skills or communication skills? Yeah, that's huge. Any other thoughts? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So probably just the biggest thing is just that speech really, like, obviously deals with communication, and that's one of the biggest like reasons why someone uses a device usually. So yeah, that's good. Okay. And then, so the overall conclusion based off of the results was that the study indicates that the decision-making responsibility is shared among a variety of individuals, and there are several factors that influence the decision and the selection-making process. And then some other takeaways they have was that a lack of the assistive technology education and training could have a huge effect on the implementation process. So if they don't know how to use these things, it's not going to be implemented in the school. And then they need more student involvement in the decision-making process. And that was really big. And they were really pushing for that in the conclusion. And then the last takeaway they had was that rural school districts need improvement because they have a lack of resources to properly make decisions about assistive technology. Okay, and then the level of evidence, we decided that it was a level 3 qualitative level of evidence. And that's just because it has multiple participants, but it was only focused on the few school districts in Texas. So we didn't feel like it could be totally generalized.
So some of the things that we have learned throughout the study is that choosing AT devices or software is more complicated or took more people and more factors than we initially thought it would. And that there's not always a standardized IEP team who selects and implements the AT devices. And then learned that rural schools tend to experience more difficulty with obtaining and providing AT, which is something that seems like it would make sense, but is not something that we originally would have thought of first reading the study. And that should be it. Is there any other questions or? Okay.
Thank you guys. Good job. Really nice job with the review. So yeah, so this really highlights, like you all said in your review, the complexities that are involved in assistive technology decisions in school systems. And it is mandated that should be a team approach, and that it should be the IEP team, the individualized education plan team. Typically involving the teacher, OT, speech therapist, a psychologist. Those are other individuals, the parent and the student. And, it's very interesting, as assistive technology gets more and more complicated, which is it becomes more and more helpful to students, but the more complicated and complex the technology becomes, the harder and harder it is to make those decisions, and it becomes more and more expensive. And sort of anecdotally, I have found in my career, one of the biggest factors really is people's experience with assistive technology in their education and understanding assistive technology. So the more experience the school system itself and the people in the school have with assistive technology, the more likely they will be to recommend assistive technology for other students. So like a school like Mary Carriolo, who has a high number of students that use pretty complex assistive technology. There's, many students in that school that use eye scanning devices, that every classroom has switches and different type of augmentative communication devices. They are very well experienced in multiple types of assistive technology, all the way from low technology, like using like PECs or picture, for communication, all the way up to like eye scanning devices. So they are much more comfortable and much more likely to recommend assistive technology for certain students versus a small rural school where, none of the educators or the support staff really had any experience with assistive technology. So because of how complicated it is and how expensive it is, it's much less likely that they will recommend assistive technology, even though it's mandated in the IDEA.
And I was surprised, happily surprised to see that the one factor was based on user friendliness and obviously, so how much the students liked it or were able to use it. And it I was thinking that it would be pricing or money.
Yeah.
They the biggest role, but I was glad to see that it was user friendliness for sure.
Yeah. And, and we've talked about that, somewhat throughout the semester, and we'll talk about it more towards the end, but that is the number one factor associated with people using even adaptive equipment and assistive technology, is really the user friendliness. How easy is it for them to use? Because if it actually makes the task more difficult, then the person is not going to use it. Okay, and just from a sort of research perspective, this is a really good example of a survey type research project. So, thinking next year in your senior research projects, many groups do end up doing survey types of projects. So this is just a really good example of how a survey project, research project might look like. Okay, so we're going to talk about, a little bit more about assistive technology in the schools. And start from here. So I'm going to go through this PowerPoint fairly quickly. So we're getting towards the end of the semester here. And a lot of the sort of examples and things that I have in this PowerPoint are things that you've heard of before. And I said this a little bit last week. So we're really getting to the point where, I've introduced you as much as I can to a lot of different types of assistive technology and adaptive equipment out there. And these last, few weeks is more about, talking about specific populations and how those examples are used with the specific populations and for different reasons, right? So the assistive technology supports these populations for different reasons and for different needs. So I'm going to sort of just go through it a little bit quicker here. I'm not going to really play any of the videos on here. Partly, I am becoming very much more mindful of how much time we are spending sitting in front of the computer and on Zoom and all this kind of stuff. So you're welcome to watch the videos sort of on your own time. And again, it's, just examples of, assistive technology that you may have already seen before. But if you are interested in seeing it again, that's the videos on here. So assistive technology in the classroom, yes, we know it helps all students better access a general curriculum. And this is sort of a timely, lecture to have. Technology itself at this point where we are is the one thing that is allowing students to still continue to access, curriculum and access learning environments in this situation right now. And it offers alternative ways for all students to participate in classroom activities. So as we know, all students in every classroom have varying abilities and very different learning styles and, sort of different developmental processes. So technology has really been able to offer, a variety of ways for all students in classrooms to interact with the curriculum. So just for a review on, so where the funding comes from for assistive technology. So for birth to 3 years of age, that is when if a child has some, sort of special needs, that the funding would fall under early intervention, right? So you've heard of early intervention before, and that is a federally mandated program that is funded by your county, like your local county, right? So here, like in New York State, we have a Monroe County early intervention program, or we have an Erie County early intervention program. And again, that's from birth to 3 years of age. So under the early intervention sort of umbrella, if you are in that program, you have a individualized family service plan that is coordinated with the service coordinator, any of the support services like PT, OT, speech. If there's a special education teacher involved, which can happen in early intervention, whoever, whatever professions are involved with that child, we all come together and design an IFSP. And it's very much in early intervention, very much based on the family's goals and what it is that the family would like to work on with their child. So in early intervention from birth to 3 years of age, the IFSP is where we would consider assistive technology, and it is where it would be documented, and then it would be funded through the county. And so sort of that's the team, the IFSP team, including the parent who would be making the decisions about assistive technology. Then when a child turns 3, they transition to the school system. Okay, so they're no longer under early intervention. And at 3 years of age, they transition to the school system program. Now, it doesn't mean that they go to the public school at 3 years of age. It's just the funding for the services comes from the school system by the time they turn 3. So they might be going to the preschool. A lot of school systems have a public preschool now, or they might not be. So it might be that they're still being seen at home like they would have been through early intervention. It just, again, shifts the funding through the school system. So then it's through whatever city or town sort of school system that child lives in. And yes, like in the article, they said the IEP is the legal document that defines sort of the education program, the individualized educational program. And that is where it would be documented about assistive technology. And that would be the team, like they said in the article, that would be considering the needs for assistive technology. So again, this would be the teacher, any support services like PT, OT, speech, special education teacher, psychologist, and again, the parent. And depending on the age of the student should also be included. And that goes all the way up, just like, school services would be provided, or curriculum services would be provided all the way up to the age of 21. Oops. So yeah, again, here in the IEP and the IFSP is where we would consider assistive technology. And this is talking about that it's a team approach, and it's the entire team that makes the decision. But most often, the most involved people are speech and language pathologists, OTs, and then the teacher and the parent. So once decisions are made about assistive technology, and assistive technology that's funded by the school is based on access to the curriculum and the student's IEP goals. So it's not based on, any needs that the child might have at home. I mean, it is very much based on specifically accessing the classroom, accessing the learning materials, accessing the school, right? However we can support that child in an academic environment. And then it must be integrated into the curriculum and used in the daily activities by the student. However, very often what happens is, the needs that the child has at school are the same needs that the child has at home. So typically the assistive technology does help children at home as well. And the assistive technology can go home with the child if the IEP team decides that it's best for the technology to go home with the child. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. So this is housed under the IDEA, the IDEA Act. And so the next couple of slides are just talking about, the specifics of what it says about the evaluation, providing the technology, selecting, fitting, customizing, all of those things, and using it in conjunction with therapies. There must be training for the child and for the family as needed, and for the professionals and whoever is using the technology with the child. So this is just an important concept of, again, remembering that it's important to educate the child and train the child and the family on how to use the assistive technology before you decide that it's not working. Because most of the time when it doesn't work, it's because, we look back and we can say, well, it was because the child didn't really know how to use it, right? Not that it was, maybe not necessarily that it was because it wasn't appropriate for them. It's because they really didn't fully learn how to use it effectively. So if you look at an IEP, the legal document of an IEP that is reviewed on a yearly basis by the IEP team, there is a section called SAS, or Supplementary Aids and Services. And this is typically where the assistive technology information is housed. And it's also, considers other types of adaptations and modifications, like furniture arrangements, seating arrangements, right? Does the child need to sit closer to the teacher? Do they need to sit, you know, in a certain spot closer to the smart board or something like that to see it better? Do they need a specific type of desk or a chair, any adaptive equipment? This is also where we would document any adjustments to the environmental sensory input, like lights and sounds that they might need. Like this might be where we would put if a child needs like noise canceling headphones, and any structural aids, wheelchair accessibility trays, grab bars, right? And those are examples. This all gets housed right in the supplementary aids and services section. And it's also where any assistive technology that is recommended goes. So for in the school system, if you remember in the beginning of the semester, we talked about the HAT model, which is the assistive technology model. That's not an OT model. Remember, that's you know, from assistive technology literature, and it's the human activity, task, and technology model. Well, there is a model specifically for school adaptations for the assessment process. And again, it is very similar to our OT PEO or PEOP model. And again, this just sort of theoretically shows you why OT fits so well in the school system, and especially with recommendations for and use of assistive technology or adaptive equipment or modifications or whatever it is that the child needs. So SET would stand for student, right? Or could be people from PEOP. And then E for the environment. T is for the tasks. What is it that the student is expected to do during this school year to, you know, based on their classroom learning, and then assess the best tools for the student to address or access their curriculum or their learning environment. So a little more specifically, what do we think about when we think about the students? What are their special needs, like special education needs? What are their strengths and abilities? Their present level of achievement? What do we expect them to do? And then any evaluation, curriculum-based evaluation or support services-based evaluation, like OTPT speech, in, you know, deciding what would be beneficial for the child. Then we have to take a look at the environment, right? And this all sounds very similar to our, you know, activity analysis, occupational profile, all of those things. Again, showing you why OT fits so well in the school system and supporting students to in their academic environment. And those should all make sense to you, all the way up to access issues, technological access, physical and instructional, and also attitudes and expectations of the staff, teachers, family, right? So it even includes in the IEP any education, training that the staff or family might need to be able to support the child in the school. And here are some of the tasks in general that we think about. You know, how is a child going to be able to communicate? Not just communicate their wants and needs, but there is a high level of communication that happens in assessing how children are doing with their learning, right? That is the main way in school systems that teachers and other staff people use to assess and try to understand if the child is learning and what they are learning is typically through communication, verbal communication, written communication, those types of things. So access to communication is very important in school systems, not just for the child to be able to socialize or say what the things that they need or want, but it's also part of the academic process. And then of course, instruction and instructional materials and how that happens, participation in the class, how productive they are, and being able to control their environment. So we think about tools for the student, not just in the terms of technology. Technology is one of the tools that we consider to support students in the school. We also think of accommodations and modifications. So the difference between accommodations and modifications from a school system setting is accommodations is where you add something to the task or the activity for the child to help them be able to complete that activity but not necessarily changing the activity. So a very clear example of this is extra time. So if a student has extra time for testing, or a student has extra time or extensions on assignment due dates, that would be an example of accommodation, right? So it's not changing the assignment, right? They're just providing some accommodations for that activity. Modifications, however, would be changing that task or changing the activity that the child or the student would be doing. So modification example would be shortened assignments, right? So if the assignment is to write a 500-word essay, and there's a modification made for a student that shortens it, and that student would need to write a 250-word essay, right? So that's changing the actual criteria of the assignment. So those are the differences there. So then here is where we think about assistive technology, but also, right, different types of alternative learning, instructional strategies, how accessible the materials are, and again, in here, what training needs to happen for the child, the family, and the staff to effectively use any of these tools. And here's more specifics about the training. So here's where I'm going to go through a little bit, some of the examples about, and just, introduce some of the examples about supporting students in the classroom. And these are very specific, and I pulled these out. These are very OT specific, right? So where we would be involved for areas of focus in the classroom. And typically it's writing, right? The motor part of writing. So, kiddos have issues holding their pencil or stabilizing the paper, visual motor, accuracy, being able to draw the letters the way that they're supposed to. And then also the composition, right? So the composition of writing would be organizing the written material. We're also typically involved in reading, being able to access reading material. Organization and time management is huge, right? Those are those executive functions that students need to be successful in school, especially as they get older. And then the visual aspect with math, reading, and note-taking. So those are the examples. This is not all-encompassing of what OTs do in the school setting. This is very much focused on the areas of focus for assistive technology or adaptations. There's a lot of other things that OTs do in a school setting. So I don't want you to think that these are the only things that we do in the school setting. This is just very much from the lens of assistive technology or adaptations. So for a writing example, right, we look at the environment, we look at different types of seating, different types of surfaces that students are writing on, right? This is from a motor perspective. So this like slant board here is a good example from a biomechanical approach, right? So it brings the visual information up closer to the child to see it better. It places them in a much a better seating posture because it helps them sit up better. Because the paper is up closer to them, they are able to stabilize their arm onto the slant board. It puts their wrist into a little, either neutral, a little bit of extension, which then facilitates that tripod grasp. So slant boards are a common recommendation for kiddos that are having issues with the motor aspect of writing. And you've seen varieties of pens and pencils and grips and all that kind of stuff. Writing templates would be more the organization and the composition of writing, pre-written words and phrases that kiddos or students can copy are some ideas, right? And here's some examples of some low-tech stuff. You've probably seen before raised line paper, right, to help the student understand the spacing, right, and how, it has to go from one line to the other, and the legibility and the accuracy of drawing those letters. There's our steady hand pen that we have in clinic. And here's some writing templates, right, beginning in elementary school, the organization, the visual spatial organization of what your writing should look like. This is the example of providing a student with pre-written words, right? So let's say you have a kiddo in, first grade, second grade, and this week their writing composition in class is about spring, and you want to support your student in being able to write sentences or things that they, the teacher's asking them to write about that has to do with spring. You might provide them with this and let the teacher know, here's a spring word bank, please put it on their desk. Then they can refer to this. It has a picture, right, and shows them how to write and spell the word. So, we can support them in the sentences that they're trying to write. And here's some example of some cards. So here's some of the videos I was telling you about, right? So these are, similar things that we've seen in the past when we talked about like, computer access, note taking, voice recorders. And so these are just examples of those types of things and how they can be used in a school setting. And here's more examples talking about writing composition. So as students develop and as they progress through the school system, right, they might need more and more support because there's more and more expectation as you go forward with writing. So those are some examples there. And you guys have probably seen this before, even in your own, maybe you remember using things like this in your own schooling when you were in elementary school, right? Organizing, right? Here's a little bit more like younger age, right? So the teacher asks the student, read a book or, whatever this is, and, and write some sentences about it. What does your character's face look like? So they draw it and then they write it, right? What is the body doing? And then this is a higher level, more complex, right? Maybe in middle school, high school, right? When they have to, sort of write longer essays or longer papers and sort of organizing how that, here's the main topic, come up with 4 subtopics and then, information about each of those subtopics, right? So just in a very visual way to help the student organize that information. And we talked about this before, right? Co-Writer is a word prediction software. It's very similar to the word prediction that you have like on iOS, like your phone or your iPad, but it's just a little bit more complex. And you can, make it a little bit more sort of individualized and focused for what you're writing and who's using it. We've talked about the LiveScribe Smart Pen. We talked about that when we were talking about individuals that have visual impairments, but this can also be helpful for individuals that have difficulty reading, right, from a learning perspective, right, from somebody who has a learning disability, that the LiveScribe Smart Pen could be helpful for when we get into like reading and writing stuff. Adapted books, this should all sound like things you've heard before. Text readers, pictures and symbols with the text, right? All of these things we've talked about all along. Again, this is just talking about it more specifically in supporting students in their academic environment. And here's just some examples here. I like this example here of the Dr. Seuss book. So supporting this student reading through this Dr. Seuss book, and maybe there's some words that the student can read on their own or can communicate on their own, or maybe the student could point to the words and say, this would be the next word. Like here is the first 2 sentences on this book. Some are high, which is this sentence here, and then go back, some are low, right? So could the student point to the words? Right? It's another way for you or the teacher to see that, yes, the student does understand and the student actually can read what it says, but they might not be able to verbally communicate that. Here's an example of like some page fluffers, right? So this is from a motor perspective. If students have issues, with fine motor control, and tactile discrimination is what you need to turn those pages. So you can put some bumps in there for them. And here's just more examples. Large text, highlighting the text, right? Visually organizing for the student what they are seeing and reading, magnifying. And here's some color filters if students have issues with contrast. You all know about audibles, right? Audio books are, becoming more and more popular, more and more useful. And certainly they're being used more and more in school systems for students that have difficulty with reading. They might have difficulty with seeing the book. They might have difficulty with understanding, like even reading comprehension. Maybe they can read it, but they really can't comprehend when they're reading the written word. And they might be able to have a better comprehension when it's verbally spoken to them versus them reading the written word. So time management is something, this is where we get into, when we talk about executive functions for students, right? So as students get older, there are more and more expectations on students to manage their own time, right? For them to know what their expectations are and to be able to meet those expectations. So some students, for example, students that have ADHD or students that have learning disabilities, students that have Down syndrome are, commonly have issues with executive function. And time management is a huge executive function skill. So we can help support those students through things that, we typically would use during our day. But maybe we can enhance them for them, make them easier for them to access. We might be educating and training them on how to use a lot of these supportive ways that we, manage our own time. This is an example. Last week when we had the article presentation, there was that one time management system, I forget what it was called, that had the dots, right? It was a visual timer and it showed the change of the time. This is two other examples of visual timers. So again, this is for students that don't quite understand, that they can't look at the clock and understand the numbers, right? And that what that moving hand means on the timer, and or that they can't, even if it's a digital flipping of the numbers as a timer, it's hard for them to understand that information. So this gives them, right, this red mark here tells them how much time is left. So they get this very bright, easy to see, easy to understand cue is as this gets smaller, this shape gets smaller and smaller, right? It's less and less time. Or same thing here, it's using changing of colors, right? So you can go, you got a lot of time. Here's going into yellow, is slowing down, and then when it gets red, your time is up. Here's some of those organizer apps, right? Helping students organize their time. We are very much involved in material management, and this typically ends up being students in, like higher grade levels in elementary school. You might start this in 4th, 5th, 6th grade, definitely in middle school and up into high school. So again, not just organizing their time, but how are they organizing their materials and the things all the things that they have to keep track of to be successful in school, right? So, most students that are successful in school use a student binder, but there might be students that need help in figuring out how to use it, the best way to use it. You're educating and training them. You might be adding visual cues for them to understand, color coding, information for them to organize their materials. We know about magnifiers. We've talked about JAWS before, and I know Erica talked about JAWS. We have it at Nazareth campus. It does speech and Braille output. It also magnifies. We've talked about Braille and iPad, smartboard stuff before. Again, this is just bringing it together and just reminding you that these are things that can be used to support academics' needs. There's also large print measuring tools, right? We do a lot of measuring in school, right? Rulers and, things like that. Large key calculators, tactile measuring devices, this is a Braille ruler. Talking calculators, models for 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional. There's just again, these are just examples. There's a lot of supportive things out there for students. And then here's just an example talking about note-taking, right? Lots of different things that students can use to help them take notes, especially nowadays. Computer-based recording or your phone recording is probably one of the most popular ways for note-taking now if writing notes is difficult or keyboarding or typing notes. So like I said, just really quickly went through all of that. Does anybody have any questions about any of those examples or how, assistive technology or modifications, adaptations in schools work, or how they're funded through the team? Again, a lot of these things we know now, and we've talked about these before, just sort of bringing it all together in a focus for individuals or students in the school. So for the last couple slides, I just wanted to show you this slide here, just gives you a couple of examples. So writing goals in the school system is just very different than goals that you might write in rehab or other skilled nursing facility. Again, goals that are written in a school system are very much based on their academic success. So here's some examples that I have up here where OT might be involved, or this might be a goal written from the occupational therapists. So the first one, right, through the use of a computer-based processing program, Dylan will demonstrate his knowledge of grade level grammar, spelling, and writing objectives with at least 70% accuracy. Okay, so we're using the computer-based processing program to help Dylan demonstrate what he knows and what he's learning about grammar, spelling, and writing in his grade, right? Because he struggles with doing it in a written form, which would be the typical way that a student would show a teacher what he's learning. And so as the OT, you might be involved in educating, training, working with the student on the computer-based processing program and how that can work in his classroom. Or for example, the second one, Dylan will use a dual switch system to select the correct context of vocabulary words 7 out of, not faux, out of 10 trials. Okay, so again, this would be certainly a goal that would be supported by the occupational therapist. You could be working with him with the switch system, from a motor aspect, the position of the switch, what does the switch need to look like? Where does it need to go? How is he going to access the switch? And then, from a cognitive aspect, does he understand using the switch and selecting and correcting? But you can see the way that this goal is written, it's written in supporting Dylan in being able to show his teacher or demonstrate, right, what he is learning about vocabulary words, because he can't do it in the typical way. He can't read it, or he can't write it, or he can't say it to the teacher, but can he use these switches with with a computer program and demonstrate that, yes, he did learn the vocabulary words for the week. Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions about the goals? So I wanted to show you those examples because they do typically sound, really different, I think, than maybe some of the goals we've done in the past. Okay, so a lot of times at this point, I get a question from the students, can the assistive technology go home, right? So this is, technology that is funded by the school system. And the purpose of the school system funding the assistive technology is to support the student in school. But then does the student leave it at school and and not have access to it at home? So the assistive technology can go home if access to the education materials, if they need to access the education materials at home through the assistive technology, which is almost always, right? Because if they're accessing the education materials in the school with the assistive technology, most likely they need that technology to access it at home. Or do they need practice using the device for daily activities or multiple settings? So if the IEP team decides that, yes, that it should go home because they need continual practice using the device. And then there might be other purposes as determined by the IEP team. Most of the time, technology does go home with a student. And most of students will fall under one of these reasons. Now, there have been instances in my career where technology didn't go home with students, and it was for very specific reasons. And it typically would be sort of psychosocial reasons. If there was maybe the technology went home and it never came back, for various reasons, or it went home and it came back broken, and it went home and it came back broken, and then a decision was made that it couldn't go home again. But most of the time, the AT does go home with the student. So just to wrap up, important points about assistive technology. The features of the AT must be incorporated into the IEP. So not just, so when you're documenting, again, the IEP is a legal document. When you're documenting a recommendation for assistive technology, it has to be more than just augmentative communication device or something like that, right? There has to be specifics about the features of the assistive technology. If assistive technology is determined as not needed, that does need to be documented on the IEP for every student that has an IEP. If they are not using assistive technology, there's a section there that says that it was considered, but the decision was made that that it was not needed based on ... Okay, so you do have to rationalize why AT was determined as not needed. And there are certain points, so we consider assistive technology on a yearly basis with the IEP team, but it should also be, we should be making sure that we are considering it from early childhood transition. So that's that transition from early intervention to the school system. So when the child turns 3 and they transition to the school system. So we should be re-looking at assistive technology at that point, and we should also be looking at it post-high school transition. So when a student either graduates high school when they're 18 or when they turn 21 and they no longer can receive school services, it should be considered again at that transition. Okay, and that's all I got. So any questions about school system stuff? Again, I just wanted to, go over from the lens of classroom and from the lens of academics, but it shouldn't be a lot of new sort of technology information. Okay, sounds good, guys. Well, Tuesday lab, I'll see you in a couple minutes, and Thursday, I'll see you on Thursday. Bye, guys.